We are continuing in the book of Ruth, if you'd like to turn there this morning. And while you're doing that, I'll pray for us. Father, this has been a busy week for many, leading up to our celebration of Jesus, your birth. We can find ourselves getting caught up in lots of activities and good things and family things and all kinds of stuff. And so today we ask that you calm our hearts, that your word would take root in our hearts, that your spirit would help each of us understand your word and apply it. And we would ask that you would transform us through the work of your spirit and the work of your word. We're grateful that we can gather here. I prayed this morning in our early morning prayer how thankful I am for the people that built this building, sustained it for all those years, proclaimed the gospel from it, and then asked us to share it. It's just been such a blessing. And so this morning my heart's filled with thankfulness for that, for sure. We're thankful that you continue to add to our numbers, and we'd ask that you'd not just broaden us, but deepen us, and that we would be people that would walk in obedience to you each day. I know at the Christmas season there's always those that are experiencing loss, rough family situations, circumstances of which they have no control over, and Christmas sort of magnifies those things. So I pray you'd give them peace, you'd comfort them, that we could comfort one another, and that you would help us to recognize that someday we will be united with you in a perfect family, and we'll enjoy eternity because of Jesus. And we're thankful, Jesus, that you came on our behalf. And we come in your name now. Amen. So we're continuing through this series of Old Testament characters, and today we're continuing with the book of Ruth. Quick update, Naomi and her husband Elimelech left the promised land to go to the land of opportunity, and that was Moab in their mind. Both her husband and her two sons died, leaving her with two daughter-in-laws that were Moabite women. And she traveled back to the promised land with Ruth. And last week they met and were encountered by the Jewish women of Bethlehem. And it was a fairly cold reception. And Naomi was distancing herself from Ruth. And that's sort of where we left the story. If you turn to chapter 1, this is how Naomi sees herself now. I'll start in verse 19. So they both went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came about when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, but the Lord brought me back empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has witnessed against me and the Almighty has afflicted me?" So her perspective right now is that God is against her, that God is a tyrant toward her, that she has lost the blessing of God. I would suggest she's sitting around feeling pretty sorry for herself these days, and she's verbalizing that to the women that have met her. She says, "Hey, don't call me Naomi. That name has got too much positivity to it. Call me Mara," which means bitter. And my life is very bitter right now. In verse 22, so Naomi returned with her Ruth the Moabitess and her daughter-in-law, and they returned to the land of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. I'm just going to mention the barley harvest real quickly here. The season in Israel, in the promised land of harvest, is about 7 to 10 weeks long. And it starts with barley. And the season is kicked off with a festival we know as Pentecost. Jews celebrate it as Shavuot. And it's one of the three main festivals of which all Jews are required to travel to Jerusalem and worship in the temple. It came about, this holiday came about when they entered into the promised land under Joshua's leadership. And Shavuot, or Pentecost, is a recognition that God is meeting their needs through the harvest of the land. And as you recall, they were told to eat from the land, and the manna was cut off. And they began to eat from the land, but they hadn't planted it, they hadn't tilled it, they haven't done anything, they just harvest and eat. And so this celebration is sort of a blessing back to God, saying, you've given us a land that's fruitful, you've sustained us through this land, and that's the celebration that's taking place in Bethlehem when they return. Now, we know it as Pentecost because it's 50 days after Passover. Thank you. Well, nobody said it. I actually thought of it. That sharp this morning. So Pentecost is the Greek word for 50 days, and after the celebration of Passover. Wow. Now, we know it from the New Testament as the day in which the Holy Spirit descended upon the believers. So when we think of Pentecost, that's what I think of. I had to sort of put it in context with this historic celebration that revolved around the harvest. So what we see here is when we think of Pentecost, remember people, the apostles were given the ability to speak in foreign languages that they had never learned. I can relate to that. And they were proclaiming the gospel, and everyone that was gathered in Jerusalem got to hear the gospel. So Gentiles heard the gospel in their own tongue. Jews from all different nations heard the gospel in their own tongue. And so I think what we're seeing a little bit here is a foreshadowing of that, in that Ruth, a Moabitess, a non-Jew, is welcome, will be welcomed into the family, and it's sort of a foreshadowing of what happened in a very profound way in the New Testament. So let's pick it up in chapter 2, and I'll read 16 verses and then come back and spend an hour or so talking about them. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, after one in whose sight I might find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field that belonged to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servants who are in charge of the reapers, he said, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant in charge of the reapers answered and said, "She is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came, and she has remained from morning until now. She has been sitting in the house. She's been sitting in the house for a little while. So let me stop there and just unpack that a little bit. The first verse is the author, which is believed to be Samuel, the prophet. The first verse is the author sort of parenthetically telling us, the audience, there's something that's going to happen here that I want you to clearly understand. And so he tells us that Naomi has a kinsman, a relative of her deceased husband Elimelech, and he's very wealthy, and his name is Boaz. Okay, so we put that away and we go, okay, that's important, and we'll find out why, obviously. And then verse 2, unrelated, Ruth, the Moabitess, as she's still referred to, she says to Naomi, "Please let me go to the fields and glean amongst the ears after one in whose sight I might find favor." And Naomi said to her, "Go, my daughter." So two things to note here. First, Ruth is saying, we're going to need some food, and it appears as though our options are very limited. So how about I go out and do some gleaning? Would you give me permission to do that? And Naomi gives her permission and refers to her as her daughter. So the relationship seems to be warming back up again. Now I want to talk a little bit about gleaning. If you go back and read the Pentateuch, which I would encourage us all to do, the nation of Israel was held in captivity in Egypt for 400 years. So for 400 years, they experienced the leadership and the culture and the religious world of the Egyptians, and they were going to be set free through the work of Moses, and they were going to be led into their historic land that is now filled with all of these pagan cultures. So between 400 years of Egyptian culture and then moving into a land full of pagan culture, the Israelites desperately needed some guidance, and that guidance came in the form of the law given to Moses. So the reason the law is so clear and succinct is because it's really not only giving them, well, it's giving them three things. First, it's giving them civil law, or moral law, excuse me. The moral law would be contained in the Ten Commandments primarily, but there are other moral laws that are repeated in the New Testament, and those laws apply to us today, okay? The second thing they were given was civil laws. Now, Israel was a nation. They were actually a theocracy. God was their king. God set out rules for them as a nation as to how to live and how to govern themselves when they got into the promised land. Those laws don't necessarily apply to us because we are not Israel. We are not a theocracy. We are a republic, and our laws are different than their laws. And gleaning was in that body of the law, okay? And then third, they had ceremonial laws. And those were the laws that told them how to relate to God, how to worship, how to sacrifice, the things revolving around their relationship with God. So I've told you this before, but I think it always bears repeating. Those three different kinds of laws are sometimes how you sort things out in the Old Testament. When you read a law about mixed clothing, cotton and wool together, that was not allowed then, and you think, well, can I wear my flannel shirts or no? You'd have to say, well, what kind of law was that, and what did that apply to, and why? And yes, you may wear flannel. So today we're looking at gleaning, and you don't need to turn there, but here's a passage about gleaning. When you reap your harvest in your field, and you forgot a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be left for the alien, for the orphan, for the widow, in order that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. And when you beat your olive tree, you shall not go over the boughs again and beat it twice. For the alien, for the orphan, for the widow, they need those olives. When you gather grapes of your vineyard, you shall not go over it again. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, I am commanding you to do this thing. So one of the civil laws that governed the nation of Israel was when you harvest, you can't go back and harvest twice. You take what you can get, and if you leave something behind, it's left for those that need it, the widow and the orphan and the alien, okay? And in fact, you were not to harvest the corners of your field. You were supposed to round out things a little bit and leave some grain in the corners of the field so that these less fortunate people can come through and glean. And then he gets so specific. He says, if you get a sheaf of wheat and you bundle it up and you lay it and you walk off and you forget it, you can't go back and get it. You have to leave it for those in need. So this isn't a principle that our government necessarily needs to enact, but it's probably a principle that our government ought to consider. So there's a couple things to be understood here. First is those with care for those without. That's the way it's supposed to be. And why? He says, hey, remember when you were in Egypt? You were a slave in Egypt, and how nice it would have been had the Egyptians cared for you differently. We're going to be different as a nation. We're going to care for our widows, we're going to care for our orphans, and we're actually going to care for aliens, foreigners that come into our land, that adopt to our culture, that become part of us. We're going to meet their needs because that's how God wants his nation to function. So we can't blanket say, well, America must have the same rules that God gave Israel. I don't think there would be wisdom in that. But there would be wisdom in saying, how does a nation care for its poor? Again, you see, it wasn't the nation doing the caring for, it was the people doing the caring for. So here's the second half of gleaning, is that it wasn't delivered at your doorstep. You didn't stay home and say, I'm hungry, and put in a phone call and say, hey, can you drop some grapes and olives and wheat off at my house? I'm poor. No, you went out in the field and you worked and you gleaned and you gathered for yourself. So there's a little bit about gleaning. That's why it's here. That's what it's about. So Naomi and Ruth are at the bottom of the economic food chain. They have no ability to care for themselves, and so Ruth goes and gleans. Now, in my mind, I'm wondering, well, why doesn't Naomi go out and glean? In fact, I would suggest that, boy, I say that phrase a lot. I would suggest. I'm going to say that anymore. So I think she's sitting home depressed. She's, woe is me. God's not fair. Look at what he's doing to me. My life is bitter. I don't even have the gumption to get off the chair and go glean. So she does let Ruth go, but this is a dangerous situation for Ruth. I would guess that the gleaning world is maybe not the kindest world you could find. There's probably some territorial aspects about it. Hey, I've gleaned in this field every year. You're not welcome here. Get out of my field. To be a single woman, a foreign woman that's probably struggling with both the culture and the language a little bit, and you're pushed out into a field with people that are hungry, the odds are pretty good you could be abused. You could be taken advantage of. So if Naomi had gone with her, I think it would have been a safer situation for Ruth, but I'm asking the question, why didn't she go? And I think she's depressed. I think she's home and she's just saying, I'm not going to do this. It could be that she's too old. I don't think so. We have no indication. She walked 10 days to get back to Bethlehem. But it raises the question, it causes me to think that there are times when you and I are depressed and we don't take the steps of faith that God would want us to take. We think it's within our rights to say, I don't like my life right now. I don't like the way things are going. I'm not going to do what it is God has given me the opportunity to do or called me to do. And sometimes in depression, we actually go back to the things that we prayed to be released from. In depression, people make decisions to go back into addiction. In depression, people make decisions to go back into relationships they should stay away from. I would encourage you, if you find yourself in depression, and we all do, your pastor does from time to time, don't make stupid decisions. Don't return to things that you prayed to be released from, but instead take steps of faith as Ruth did to say, what can I do to get myself out of this situation and move forward? Okay, so she's been gleaning, and now gleaning is not, I can't imagine it being fun. I grew up picking strawberries, and if you creamed the row, some of you might know what that means, but if you picked all the visible berries and filled your hallux and carriers and crates and moved on, you could make more money if you just picked what you could see. The problem is every strawberry field has a row boss. And it's always a woman in my case, she would come behind you and look through the bushes and say, hey, Brett, you're missing things all along here. And she says, I want you to go back and do this again. Well, that was depressing for two reasons. First one is you wanted to pick with your friends so you could visit and throw berries at your buddies. And so they're way up there now, and I go clear back to the end and go over. The second reason is there's not much left, but there is something left. So gleaning is sort of going back on your row and taking the very few things that are left. And she spent all day doing this. So that's where we find her now. Now, verse 4. Now behold, Boaz from Bethlehem. He enters the scene. So all of a sudden it becomes a Hallmark movie here. This is a Hebrew holiday. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Boaz shows up. Now, we've learned about Boaz. What do we know about him so far? He's related to Elimelech, and he's a man of great wealth. We will learn that he's single, and he's willing to mingle. So, if lightning strikes, I deserve it. So, there you go. But here's what he says. And Boaz shows that he came from Bethlehem. Remember, they're in this little town of Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, how many bushels have you got today? Why is that guy over there sitting in the shade? Why isn't he reaping? How are we doing based on last year's averages? Why is it that every time I come here, you guys seem to not be working the way I want you to work? Boaz didn't say any of that, did he? I think a guy's first words are often pretty important. And here's his first words to his workers. May the Lord be with you. I think I'd like to work for Boaz. He shows up at mid-afternoon. He's rich enough to have supervisors and gleaners. He greets them with words of faith and kindness and warmth. He's demonstrating the fact that he has a relationship with Yahweh. He's concerned about them as individuals as opposed to just their production. Look at their response. And they said to him, may the Lord bless you. So immediately you get the sense we've got a good man here in Boaz. And he's doing business right. And those that work for him like him. They respond back with a blessing of faith as well. I'm going to sidetrack here just a second, and I've done this before, and those of you that have been a part of UFC for years, you've heard this before, but it bears repeating. How you engage in the work world is of vital importance in the faith world, okay? Now, Boaz is an owner. He can hire and fire. He can make all the decisions. He can demand things from people. He can set standards, and if they're not met, he can dismiss people. He can dismiss without cause, I'm quite certain. He's an owner, and owners have tremendous influence and power in the work world. And there's a number of owners in this room. And I'm asking you to consider how you live your faith in the context of the workplace. Do you have the welfare of your workers and their families over and above the profitability of your business? Now, I understand businesses have to be profitable to remain businesses. And you can't care for families if you can't employ them. But we can choose to walk in faith as owners, and I say, I'm speaking third person here, you can choose to walk in faith as an owner and say, I want to put the things of God over and above the things of profitability. And I want that to be demonstrated in the culture in which I create in the workplace. As an owner, you have all kinds of freedom and latitude. Now, our laws are getting narrower and narrower. It's harder, I think, to be an overt Christian owner, but it's not impossible. And I think it's really important to recognize that a man like Boaz has the impact that he has because of the way he chooses to live his faith out. First words out of his mouth is that he's acknowledging his relationship with Yahweh. The first words out of the worker's mouth is, bless you, boss. We love you. So as an owner, are you thinking about how you can use the influence that you have to not only care for your employees, you see them as God's creation, you recognize them as people of value and worth, and you care for them, but are you thinking about them eternally and spiritually? If you're not, I'd suggest you're missing a fantastic opportunity. Now, how to do that? I think that depends on you, depends on your gifting, depends on the kind of work that it is, but there's an opportunity here to do that. Most in this room, or many in this room, aren't owners, but you might be managers and leaders. Your influence is reduced because you don't have complete authority. But the authority you do have, are you exercising it in a way that would reflect positively and favorably on your God? Are you thinking about people's eternal destinies? Are you sharing your victories with those that created the victory? Are you passing the blessings along to others? Are you caring for those under your leadership? And are you living in a fashion where they know you're a believer and they can see the values that you possess? And are you creating a culture where they go, okay, being a Christian looks good to me, as opposed to it's not something I'm interested in based on the way my boss treats me. All of us at some point or another have been workers. We've all been in the position of having a boss, having someone that leads us, having an owner over us. And I guess I'd ask the question, when the boss walks in, how do you respond to him or her? Is it in your mind with a Lord bless you, or, oh, Lord, there he is again? And we have that choice as well. In fact, how we work in the workplace is a demonstration of our faith, and it can work itself up through the ranks as well as an owner can work itself down through the ranks. Now, all of us also employ people. In other words, you care for the waitress or waiter. You have a service person come into your home. You might have a yard crew that cares for your yard. We're all employers of some sort. And I'd ask you, how are you using those opportunities? I got one quick story to tell you. A buddy of mine's a plumber. And we were shooting the breeze one day, and I said, hey, how did you come to faith? He goes, oh, it's a funny story. He said, I had a house call, and I was fixing a drain in a bathtub. And the husband came in and put the lid on the toilet seat down and sat and talked to me. And he said over time, he began to tell his story of how he came to Christ. And he said, it bugged me a little bit because I'm trying to get my work done, and he's just talking at me. He said, but by the end of the time, I understood the difference, and he was a Mormon at the time. He said, I understood the difference between what I believed and what was the truth of God's word. And he says, I gave my life to Christ. So bug your plumber. Annoy your yard crew. I recognize that's a unique setting, and it took a courageous man to do that. But we have these opportunities. So I go down this rabbit trail because we're going to see Boaz as an amazing man of character. But the first thing we see Boaz as is an employer. And the first words out of his mouth are blessings of faith to those that he employs. And it's reciprocal. I think we tend to compartmentalize our faith way too much. You know, we come to church on Sunday, but the rest of the week, it's about other things. And if we do that, we have missed the opportunities that God is handing us on a daily basis in the context of workplaces to do something eternal. And for those of you that are frustrated with your jobs, it's like sort of this mindless, I go to work and I don't know why and I don't like it. You know, we live in a culture where you can quit and find a new job, and there's no sin in that. But we also have people with an eternal destiny, and we understand that we can do something eternal in the midst of the temporal. And don't forget that. And this week, be looking for opportunities that God hands to you to do something eternal in the midst of your temporal. Okay, let's keep going. So Boaz asks about her. He said to his servants in charge, whose young woman is this? So there's a possessiveness here. She's not mine. She doesn't work for me. I know all my employees. Who's that? And the servant in charge of the reapers answered, and he said, this is the young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. So everybody in Bethlehem's talking about her. They all know who she is. And we'll see in a moment that Boaz knows who she is as well. And he says, she came and asked if she could glean, and she's been working hard. She's been here since early morning, and it's about lunchtime, and she's been working hard. So that's the report that we get from the supervisor. So now Boaz goes over and talks to Ruth. Now we don't know if Boaz is George Clooney single or if he's Danny DeVito single. We do know he's got some money. We'll find out later he is older than Ruth. But this is sort of this is a unique setting. And, well, let me keep going. So Boaz walks over to Ruth and he says, listen carefully, my daughter. I don't know that that's the best line to use at the outset, but he says, don't go glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you're thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. And then she fell on her face, bowing down to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? So Boaz recognizes her. He addresses her. He says, listen, I don't want you to be put at risk in any way. So you stay in my fields. So there is risk in this gleaning. And he says, and I've commanded my people not to touch you. In other words, no man's going to grab you. No woman's going to slap you. You're going to be cared for in my field. Don't go to another field. Stay in my field. And he said, and if you get thirsty, drink from our water. Now, I don't know how much, cultural differences there are, but he's basically saying, I'm going to treat you just like I treat my workers. What's mine is yours. What's theirs is yours. Stay in the field. Now, for me, that she would fall down on her face and bow to the ground seems really odd. But culturally, that was the thing. It wasn't uncommon to do that. And she's acknowledging, why would you, in your position of wealth and rich, those are the same things, wealth and power, why would you take an interest in me? Do you remember? I'm a foreigner. So she knows her place. It has sunk in hard in her heart that she is not like everybody else around her. I'm a foreigner, and this is my lot in life. And Boaz answers this way. And Boaz answered and said to her, all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and mother in the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work, and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Then she said, I found favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants. So they have this exchange, and I read between the lines. He's heard that the gossip in the community is quick and thorough, and he knows all about her backstory. And the way he interprets her backstory is she is a woman of character. She has given up her life in Moab to care for her mother-in-law. She left her mom and dad to come live with strangers. She's out here working because she's caring for one who's refusing to work. And then he says, may the Lord bless you and reward you. Can you hide under the shelter of his wings? Can you take refuge under our God, because he will protect and care for you. So this is quite an exchange. Let me wrap a couple things up and I'll make some application here in a second. Verse 12. Verse 14. Now it's mealtime. And Boaz said to her, come here that you may eat of the bread and dip your piece of bread in the vinegar. So she sat beside the reapers, and he served her roasted grain, and she ate and was satisfied and had some left. This is probably the first time in weeks that she's eaten her fill. And she does it because of the kindness and generosity of Boaz himself. When she rose to go glean, Boaz commanded his servants, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. And also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not rebuke her. So you see what's happening here. Boaz is, I don't know if he's smitten or not, but he has this position of care and concern for this young woman. And he says, listen, just leave some grain behind so she's got plenty. And if she wants to glean with you, by all means, let her. And don't push her away like we would other people, but you let her stay and glean amongst you. Now, let's draw a couple of applications or conclusions here. Boaz is taking a risk in this, in my opinion. We don't know if he's George Clooney or Danny DeVito, so we don't know what the coworkers are thinking. It could be like, oh boy, he's going to make a fool of himself because she is way too young and way too good looking, and he's old, and this is awkward. Oh, look, he's serving her lunch. Oh boy, this is really embarrassing. This will never work, So he's willing to push back even against the opinions of those that he works with every day. And he's going to do what in his mind is right, even though it might cost him a little bit in the opinion of others. Boaz is using his position and power, his influence, his wealth, his connections, his cultural presence. He's using all of that to her advantage. He's willing to say, listen, I recognize in this relationship I have all the advantage, you have none, but I'm going to use that advantage for your blessing. And in the end, it obviously is a tremendous blessing to her. You and I, in many ways, we have all the advantage. By and large, if we just went culturally, we'd say we're sort of a middle, upper class, predominantly white church. So there's some advantage there. By and large, most of us have been raised in the faith, have come to faith, understand the gospel, have access to the Word of God, have had adequate teaching the majority of our Christian lives. So there's an advantage that we have in the spiritual realm. In the social realm, many of you are highly connected. You're members of the right clubs, you run in the right circles, you drive the right cars, you live in the right neighborhoods. There's an advantage there. How do we use those advantages? If a person only used those advantages to further their own interests, you and I are no different than the culture around us. That's what the culture does. Now, on occasion, you'll meet someone that's not a follower of Christ, but uses their advantages in a really healthy and good way. But by and large, most non-believers use their advantages for their own purposes. And if they do help someone, it's usually an advantage to them to help them. They get their name on a donor list. They get their name on a building somewhere. They're given acknowledgement for their generosity and kindness. You and I are called to be completely different than that. We're called to recognize our advantages and to use them for those that don't have them. So he's willing to put all of this at some level of risk. He's putting some profitability at risk because he's saying, hey, don't harvest the way we normally do. Leave a bunch behind so she can have it. He's putting some cultural cachet at risk. He's going to get down and serve this foreigner. So, if you're out in the field, there's Boaz, there's the supervisors, there's the maids, and there's a pecking order in the gleaning maids, and then there's Ruth. And Boaz is saying, I'm going to come way down here, and I'm going to serve her. I'm going to give her my lunch. And this opens up a relationship, a warmth, a kindness, an awareness of why are you in your position caring for me in my position. The beauty of this is that it doesn't take a whole lot of creativity and imagination to suggest this is a picture of Jesus. The creator of the earth, eternally existent, second member of the Godhead, sitting on his throne, not a care or worry in the world, relating in perfect harmony to the Father and to the Spirit, a completeness that you and I can't fully fathom. In the midst of that, chooses to come way down here. He takes on human flesh. He's born in the very town we're talking about. I'm going to give it away, but Ruth is his great-grandmother. Ruth is David's great-grandmother. He comes and takes on flesh. He lives in poverty. He's misunderstood. He's accused. He's beaten. He's scorned. He's crucified. He used all of his power to rescue those of us that have none. He was resurrected from the dead, placed back in his eternal glory, and with him he brings those who in faith believe that he did what I just described that the scriptures tell us. So what does this mean for you and for me? We are to walk like Jesus. We have his Spirit living in us. We are to be people that use our privilege of any sort to care for those that don't have that privilege. And I don't mean just financially and physically. I mean even more so spiritually. For us to reap the benefits and soak in the blessings of being a follower of Jesus, to be adopted into God's family, to have eternal life given to us because of the work of Jesus on the cross, to know that our future is secure, to be blessed in all those ways, and then to ignore those that don't yet have those blessings. That's not what we're called to do. Boaz is an example for us to say, I'm going to take the privilege and care for those without it. And I'm going to trust that God is going to step in and use me to make a difference eternally in the temporal world in which I live.